On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we update everything that went down over the weekend. Zuby Ejiofor transferring away. What's the latest on Mackenzie Mgbako? And how should KU fill out the rest of their roster after the Hunter Dickinson decision last week?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well on Rock Chalk Sports Talk Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get any of your podcasts. And on today's edition of the show, which you can also find on YouTube, we're going to be going over the KU basketball weekend recruiting update. Zuby Ejiofor transferring away. The latest on Mackenzie Mgbako, KU's basically highest rated target at this point, with Hunter Dickinson already committing. And how should KU, are there certain ways that would make sense to fill out the roster at this point in time? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started today. Okay, so our KU basketball weekend kind of recruiting update here. So Zuby Ejiofor is transferring away. This was put in the aftermath of Hunter Dickinson committing to the team. His guardian kind of took to Twitter and said some stuff on Twitter that it was even before Hunter Dickinson committed that kind of made it seem like this was very much a real possibility. And he kind of added to it as well, kind of like talking about, the days of the Ochais and Udoka Azubukis are done, which I did find kind of funny because Ochai and Udoka stayed for 4 years, so like they did kind of stick it out through the program and everything. But you get what he's saying, and you understand why Zuby is transferring away from the program because of, there's really not much playing time to be had this year, right? I mean, you're talking about Hunter Dickinson played 32 minutes per game his last 2 years at Michigan. Now, if he comes to Kansas, he is coming to Kansas, does he play that same amount at KU? Or does KU have better backup five options that they need to get minutes than Michigan had, to where, you'd rather play Dickinson 28 or 30 minutes per game and keep him a little more rested and be able to, like the UConn path, right? Adama Sanogo was one of the best big men in the country. He was still playing, 28 minutes per game, something like that, because Klingon was that good coming off the bench that they had to get him minutes. And ideally, that would be the situation for KU, like Ernest or Zuby or both would have been that good for Kansas that it's like, well, we have to get this guy on the court, to where it's like, yeah, we're playing Hunter Dickinson a good 28 minutes, and this other guy's playing, 6 minutes or 12 minutes, whatever. If you just split the difference and say Hunter Dickinson plays 30 minutes per game, that would only give you 10 minutes to play at the center position. And so at that point, if you're Zuby, you're like, well, I could beat out Ernest. Realistically, though, I'm either going to be even with him, so we're each going to get 5 minutes a game, or what if I'm behind him and then I'm not getting any minutes? You know what I mean? I guess even best case scenario, you're getting 10 minutes, but I think it's more about the worst case scenario there, that you might not be playing at all. So you go in the recruitment. I thought for a bit, and I think this was the growing sentiment as the offseason kind of got going, was that Zuby and Ernest were going to compete it out with each other. Maybe whoever lost the job by the end of next year would transfer away. But because Dickinson comes in, it maybe speeds up that timeline a little bit more. And for Zuby, he definitely has to pick. I mean, this two-time transfer rule thing now, you have to be a little bit more careful if you are a player transferring after just your first year to school, because now you're a lot more tied into where your next school is. I almost wonder if we're going to see more often now. Like if you are transferring from a school like Kansas after just year one, you wouldn't be able to get a free transfer the second time until you're a graduate. So realistically, you're going to be at that next school for the next 2 years if you can graduate in 3 years. And so I wonder if you see more players like that go to schools that are maybe safer routes, like routes that you're going to have less competition to be the starter, so that you can always transfer back up again if you do have those few good seasons. But nonetheless, with Zuby, it is unfortunate to see him transferring away. He's a guy that I really enjoyed watching. Really good kid, fun story, and everything with how he got to KU and whatnot. And good rebounder, good rim protector, good, lob catcher, dunker, stuff like that. Didn't have the offensive polish to grab a bigger spot in the rotation last year. And that's, part of the reason why KU was going after Hunter Dickinson so hard this year, that they didn't have the offensively polished centers on the roster so far. Obviously, Dickinson's also an All-American candidate. So, you bring that guy in and you figure out the rest later. KU did not want Zuby Ejiofor to transfer out of the program, but this is kind of the aftermath of bringing on a Hunter Dickinson. Sometimes this happens. And it sucks because you could have seen Zuby being a really good player at KU, his junior season or his senior season or something. So you never get to see the fruits of your labor there. And again, this is KU, so it is, such a high level win, cutthroat mentality type of thing that you take Hunter Dickinson and you have to deal with this. Realistically, you'll have now the open scholarships in the future to be able to bring on other high school recruits or other transfers that are really good that should get you, you would hope that level of play. But it certainly brings to question the roster construction at this point of college basketball for KU, if there are certain things, which I want to discuss that here in a second. But yeah, I mean, you definitely, I think right now, Ernest Udeh would be the favorite to, and this is part of the transfer decision too. Like if Hunter Dickinson was for sure 1 year left and Zuby was the backup big and he would get 10 minutes this year, but then next year would be the year that he would be the starter, he's probably sticking around. The fact of the matter is that he has probably, you're not getting a ton of minutes this year. And then I guess if Hunter Dickinson goes after 1 year, which is possible he comes back for 2 years, but I'm not banking on it. Then you have Ernest Udeh possibly being the starter by that year, and then you're behind him. So it makes sense for like Ernest, who now we're kind of waiting on. The deadline to enter the portal is, I believe, Thursday. I don't know if that's like by Thursday or Thursday at midnight. And we'll see if this means anything for Ernest Udeh. But if you're Ernest, you can at least view this as like, well, Zuby's gone now. I'm going to eat up all the backup center minutes. I guess KJ could play backup center minutes, but seems by all accounts they want to play him at the 4. So I'm going to eat up all the backup center minutes this year. I'm going to develop. I'm going to learn from Hunter Dickinson. Maybe I'll pick up some post work and stuff from him. And then the next year, Hunter's going to be gone, and I'm going to be the starting center, and I'll be playing 25 minutes per game. Right? The path is there now for Ernest that it makes more sense for him to stick around. But yeah, I mean, with Zuby transferring out, you lose out on some long-term potential, and it just seems like this is the way that things are going to go now. If you come in as a freshman at Kansas and you don't play as much as you like, and they bring in another transfer, I mean, because you're constantly going to be recruited at your same position at Kansas in the portal and in freshman. And if you don't like your future outlooks, you're going to be gone sooner than later from the program. I do wish him well. I think he's going to have a good college basketball career somewhere. We'll see where he ends up going. I think he's going to be a good player at some point. Now, is it more about opportunity? Is it about development? By the time he's a junior or senior, will he be able to hit the ground running this year's a sophomore? I don't know. But I mean, I'm very confident that he'll be a productive player to some degree wherever he goes next. And now if you're Kansas, you have 2 scholarships open because Kyle Cuff transferred. Then you brought in Hunter Dickinson. Now Zuby transfers. So what do you do with the roster? Let's discuss that next here with Locked On Jayhawks. First, though, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. You can bet on some of the action tonight. The Warriors and the Lakers are going at it. You got the Heat and the Knicks going at it. I've just been, just pounding like overs on Jimmy Butler stats. You do same game parlays, like over points, over rebounds, over assists, put them together. You get a nice boost, and playoff Jimmy tends to perform for you. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sports book. You get paid instantly. It's a safe and secure app. They have great promotions every day, from both their promos to their boosts, which is just really nice to have those boosts that they'll put together. Last night, there was one that hit for the Suns-Nuggets game. It was like Devin Booker, 30-plus points, Kevin Durant, 25-plus, Jokic, 20-plus or something. Both Booker and Jokic went for like 40. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So how to fill out the roster for KU. And this is less about the players specifically. Like, ideally, fill out the roster, add Mackenzie Mgbako and Ron Holland. No, I'm just talking about from a kind of theoretical sense at this point, because Zuby Ejiofor transferring away. And it brings up a couple interesting questions to me. One, obviously you want to bring in another player here. You have 10 scholarship players at this point. You want to bring in another player who can be a part of that rotation. realistically, is there any thought in the world to being like, well, maybe we'll just, let's say you had Mackenzie Mgbako, that gets you your 11th scholarship player. What if you just sat out and decided to be like, yeah, maybe we don't need to give the scholarship out to a 12th guy? Because if we bring in another center to be a body, what if Ernest views that as, oh, great, more competition or somebody else you're recruiting in front of me, and then he jets off, right? Or what if, like, you just upset somebody that caused a freshman to decommit when in reality you were just trying to bring on somebody who is depth? What if you just played without that scholarship this year? And then at that point, you would have used up, because you have to, for the self-imposed sanctions, you can't use 3 scholarships over 3 years. But if you use 2 of them this year, then one of the next 2 years, you would be full up on scholarships, and the other, you'd only have to lose 1. It's a possibility. But I think in terms of what this means for roster development, okay, think about this. So you have Bobby Pettiford come in for, 2 years, and Zuby Ejiofor come in for a year, and all these guys who, Tristan Enarunas of the world, right, that come in for maybe a year or two, it doesn't work out, they get over recruited and they ship off elsewhere, as opposed to being somebody who is going to be a depth player and then maybe starts by their like senior year. Like, for instance, Sviatoslav Mikhailuk, he didn't really play much his freshman and sophomore year, right? I mean, by the time he was a junior, he was part of the rotation, and then as a senior, he really took off. But it feels like those days are kind of gone at this point. Like, sure, there'll be exceptions to the rule and stuff, but I almost wonder if it makes more sense from a roster building standpoint moving forward to really only bring in, like, okay, you bring in your freshmen, right? Just because you want to see which ones hit and which one eventually can earn that spot. But does it make sense to bring in big classes of freshmen anymore? Like, does it almost make more sense to bring in transfers? Because if they've already used their one transfer rule, like guys with multiple years left as transfers, because if they've already now transferred into your program, that means they've used their one free transfer, right? So, like, are you better off bringing in a guy who has 2 years left or 3 years left of eligibility into your program as a transfer? Because if they're going to have to transfer again, they're going to have to sit out a year, and that's probably going to be distasteful to them, that they're not going to want to transfer. It's going to have to be like a last resort for them. And to that standpoint, if you want to have guys who do stick around in the program for a few years to where you can develop them, maybe your best odds isn't to bring in a freshman who, like, again, you're taking on your El Marco Jacksons, you're taking on like your Marcus Adams, those players where it's like, yeah, they could probably make a real impact in year 1, to where if they do come back for year 2, they feel like, yeah, I'm going to be a starter, right? Like, you take those guys for sure. But the guys who are in your non-top 50 recruits, or maybe your non-top 100 guys, where you've taken those on in the past, is almost like a home run swing to be like, yeah, we don't know if it'll hit, but if it does, it'll be great. And a lot of times it has hit for KU with, Christian Brown and Devontae Graham and Frank Mason. But lately, with the way that things work, if you're not ready to play right away in year 1, it's not going to be something where it's like, oh, well, you might not be ready to play in year 1, but by year 3 or year 4, you'll get on the court, because it doesn't matter. Because then by year 3 or year 4, you're going to be like, I haven't played, I'm gone. Christian Brown got on the court in year 1. Devontae Graham got on the court in year 1. So this is less about like the recruiting rankings. I guess I probably phrased that wrong in being like, if it's a not top 50 recruit, no, it's not about that. It's about, will you be at least a role player by year 1, right? That's kind of the thing. And if it's somebody who you're going to bring in and you're like, they're a project, they're not going to be a role player in year 1, but we're hoping they will be by year 3, there's no point in that, because they're just going to be transferred by then. And so to that notion, are you better off just bringing on a kid who is a freshman, or was a freshman, was a sophomore, and is transferring and has multiple years left to play, and by transferring to you, has to stay there a few years unless they want to sit out a year, which they're not going to want to do. And I wonder how much that becomes a viable option moving forward. But then again, the alternative is maybe the KU staff, maybe, there's certain teams in college basketball that actually would prefer to just keep doing this because it gives them more of an opportunity, right? It's hard to run a kid off, so to speak, if he's going to have to sit out a year at his next destination. It's not as hard to run off a kid if he hasn't used his transfer yet and he's going to transfer somewhere else and be eligible, to where you can basically run him off and then have more of free reign to what you want to do with the roster that year. So maybe they would prefer to just keep bringing on freshmen and deal with the turnover and having to run kids off and stuff. But if you are wanting to really develop kids inside the program and not have them leave after a year or two, I think your best bet might be what I just said. You still bring on the kids that you feel like will have the role in year one if they are new freshman players or something like that. But if they are more projects long term, don't expect to get the benefits of the long term because they probably won't be around and they'll be somebody else's long term project. You're better off getting the kid who went to another school and was their long term project and is now going to be hitting the fruits of their labor by the time they transfer into you, if that kind of makes sense. All right, I want to finish off an update on Mackenzie Mgbako. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Finishing things up with an update on Mackenzie Mgbako. So Mgbako, top 10 recruit. I think 24/7 Sports came up with their updated rankings, and they have him updated as number 10. Clearly somebody who, if he comes in and everything hits and plays really well, he could be like a lottery pick type of guy, but also not somebody who maybe is seen as like a surefire that he would come in and automatically, turn into that type of player, right? We've seen players that go a little bit slower, and who knows which one that would be for Mgbako. But nonetheless, it would be a very big get for KU because, right now you're looking at it and you're trying to kind of just add that one final piece here. He'd be a good fit around Hunter Dickinson because of his shooting potential at kind of a 3-4 man spot. You could play him at both those spots where you're looking for extra minutes. And Marcus Adams looked really good in that, whatever it was, All-Star event. Nobody was really playing defense, but he did look good. You saw pure shooting form from really deep. You saw the dunking ability. Like, again, he wasn't really getting guarded. Nobody was really playing defense there, but you did see some of the tools that make him enticing. How ready will he be as a freshman after reclassifying? Now, this was his original, age range, but he wasn't playing against super high competition. I don't know. I'm excited to see what Marcus Adams can do. He is very intriguing to me, but with KJ Adams, how is he going to fit at the 4? With Marcus Adams, how is he going to make that jump up? With Mackenzie Mgbako, you get some extra coverage at the 4. You get another versatile player, which never hurts. So he visited KU. It sounded like the visit went great. It sounded like there was going to be a chance that he was going to go to KU, and seems like he wants to kind of go through all his options just to make sure that he has everything in front of him, that he has all the options up in front of him, and he can make a kind of logical decision. This seems more like the recruitment of Nicholas Timberlake, whether it's because Mgbako feels that way, his family, both, whatever, to where Timberlake went on all his visits, then he evaluated, then he chose, right? This isn't one of those guys where it's like he's going on the visit, whichever one's last, that's where he's going to, right? So he visited KU after he visited St. John's. Then over this past weekend, he visited Indiana. Now, obviously, he hasn't committed to Indiana, so that goes back in line with the idea that, he's going through all his visits, he's going through his options, then he's going to decide. But now he's scheduled to have a visit to Louisville, which is his final visit scheduled of the 4 for, I believe, Friday is the scheduled visit time, I think this upcoming weekend. Now, we'll see if he ends up taking that one. If he ends up canceling that one, then that tells you, well, it's one of these 3 other schools. I kind of get the sense that it would be KU or Indiana at that point. I don't know. I think KU probably feels pretty good about where they are with Mgbako. Now, you never do totally know, though. When a kid does have an open mind and goes through all his visits, I guess stuff could change, right? But we'll see if he ends up doing the Louisville thing. If he cancels it, then I think that probably tells you the timeline of his decision would probably be like this week, right? I mean, if he cancels a visit for Friday, probably coming sometime in the next couple days. But if he ends up going on his visit on Friday, then you're probably looking at a decision at that point the following week, the next week. And that might not be the worst thing in the world for KU, just in terms of going back to the transfer things. You get past the transfer portal being closed at May 11th, but that, I guess, wouldn't affect any possible freshmen. So who knows? It almost feels like at this point, even though Kansas has open scholarships, like everybody they bring on, it's almost forcing somebody else out elsewhere. But it does still feel like Kansas has a really good shot at Mackenzie Mgbako. And we'll just kind of wait and see on where some of those other visits go and everything like that. But certainly he would be a very good fit for KU and would be able to kind of be that final piece to push you over the edge, so to speak, that you'd be looking for. Obviously, they're already number 1 on Bart Torvik. It would make them even better on Bart Torvik. I think they'd move up a little bit more in their offensive rating, even though they'd go from number 1 to a better number 1 defensively. I think they'd jump from number 4 to number 3. And we'll keep an eye on Mgbako as the week goes on. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back for tomorrow's episode with Nick Schwartz to talk more about the Hunter Dickinson decision, some other KU basketball stuff. Whose stat line is it anyway? Fun show planned for tomorrow with Nick. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can catch anything you missed on the Locked On Jayhawks podcast, wherever you get any of your podcasts. podcasts from some past weeks, check out the Mackenzie Mgbako deep dive. Check out the stuff on Hunter Dickinson. You can also find us on YouTube. Have a good rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow with LOJ.